Good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. Driving around with expired tabs in Seattle won't get you pulled over by police anymore in most situations. Same goes for that dangly thing that's been hanging from your rearview mirror. Yep, those are actually illegal. KUOW's Amy Radil is here to tell us about the changes and why they're happening now. But first, let's get you caught up. Amazon will shut down its Sold by Amazon program following an antitrust investigation. In a lawsuit, the state attorney general's office says the company engaged in price fixing. The AG says the program allowed the online retailer to agree on a price with third-party sellers rather than compete with them. Under an agreement, Amazon will shut down the program nationwide and pay more than $2 million. State Supreme Court justices will consider whether checking fares on public transit violates a passenger's privacy rights. The case involves a man who was asked to prove he paid for his bus ride by Snohomish County Sheriff's deputies. His attorneys say the act of fare enforcement violated his civil rights under the state constitution. If the case is successful, transit agencies could be stripped of their state-granted authority to ask riders to prove they've paid the fare. And make more room for Megan Rapinoe in Soto. The Reign said yesterday they signed the All-Star forward to a one-year deal. That means fans will get to see her play at Lumen Field this upcoming season. The team recently announced it will play its home games there in 2022, after plans to build a soccer-only stadium in Tacoma were disrupted by the pandemic. The conversation about how to change the city's approach to policing is getting a little more specific. Earlier this month, SPD said it would stop pulling people over for some minor traffic violations, part of a strategy to address disproportionate enforcement and reprioritize what the city's cops spend their time on. Amy Radil is here to explain. She covers politics, government, and law enforcement for KUOW. Hey, Amy, good to have you on.
Thanks so much.
So the talk around police reform tends to feel overwhelming and fraught at times, but this sounds like a smaller change that will actually show up in people's everyday lives. What's going on here?
Yeah, or not show up.
Right.
In terms of people being pulled over. So Seattle Police Department is not going to pull people over for 4 types of violations anymore. They include having expired registration tabs, missing your front license plate, having cracks in your windshield, or those air freshener tags hanging from your mirror. And also, bicyclists won't be pulled over or stopped for not wearing a bike helmet. Seattle's one of just a few cities so far to make these changes. We're the first in Washington State, as far as I know. Philadelphia and Minneapolis are doing this. And these changes come out of a work group that included Seattle Police, people from the Transportation Department, the ACLU, police accountability folks. And it was all kicked off by Lisa Judge. She's the Inspector General for the Seattle Police Department. So it's her job to look at systemic issues and how to solve them.
The beginning of it was the letter that I sent to Chief Diaz in May of 2021, asking him to work with OIG to start rethinking whether traffic stops, in-person traffic stops, were necessary in a variety of circumstances, and if not, how we moved the Seattle Police Department in the direction of deprioritizing or perhaps just stopping altogether.
Now, just to be clear, Amy, these are still enforceable violations, but they won't be the primary reason that someone is pulled over, correct?
That's right.
Okay. So let's talk about the rationale behind the policy shift and why now is the right time to do this.
So Lisa Judge said that the focus was really about the word safety, and the work group decided it's not really a safety issue if people have expired tabs. And these stops do present safety issues for officers and members of the public. You know, sometimes these minor stops escalate and the result is a fatal encounter, like the case of Philando Castile in Minnesota. He was stopped over a missing taillight in 2016. And here, you know, we had Giovan Joseph McDade. He was killed by police in Kent, Washington in 2017 in a confrontation that started with having expired car tabs.
And those encounters might be rare, but enforcement of these violations against people of color are not rare.
And these policy changes coincide with two things. The videos that we have of some of these traffic stops that go terribly wrong. So people are seeing what happened in the videos. And we're getting a lot more data that shows that there are racial disparities in our enforcement of these violations. Seattle's Black population is about 7% of our total. And yet, according to the city's own data, Black drivers were ticketed at 3 times that rate over the last several years. So people are saying, what can we do to prevent racial profiling and to prevent these fines that can, drag people into criminal matters? This is Po Leapai. He's a member of the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability, and he spoke at a recent press conference.
I drove a Cadillac DeVille for a long time, a pearl white one with clear windows. I got pulled over multiple times in a year. Now I drive a little cherry red Fiat for about 7 years now. I've gotten pulled over once.
So you hear this frustration about some of these violations being unevenly enforced. We don't have data by type of car like he's talking about, but we are getting data on the race of the drivers who get these citations.
And that is so significant, Amy. Of course, this was not easy to negotiate. Do we have any idea how police officers feel about the change?
Yeah, unfortunately, we didn't get to talk to SPD about it. I spoke with one retired officer who said their understanding is that officers kind of shrugged when they heard this new policy because they are stretched so thin. They aren't ticketing people for these kinds of violations very much right now. But some police do feel like these stops do serve a safety purpose. So basically, they still want drivers to have to do something about, some of these issues with their cars. And Lisa Judge said, she's on board with that too. She's glad that Chief Diaz agreed with these initial steps, not stopping people over expired tabs. And she has the impression that the police department is working to come up with some really good solutions to actually direct people to where they can get their problem with their car fixed, which, she says will make people safer.
So what does this move say about how the city is working towards addressing systemic bias and these types of infractions that, like we talked about, can often be a result of poverty?
I think it says that Seattle is part of this national conversation. Our city is taking these small initial steps in this effort to not get people entangled in courts and jail and fines, just because they're poor.
Yeah. And I wonder if people think these changes will reduce racial disparities that we've seen in traffic stops, or if it's more about building community trust.
Well, we're about to find out. SPD has started tracking all their traffic stops in their records management system. That started last August. So we're going to have better data going forward. We're going to know how many tickets are written, and the race of the drivers who are being ticketed is going to be more clear. So we will see. And then on community trust, I immediately thought of Deshaun Quinn and wanted to get his take on this. He's a city council member in Tukwila, and he serves as vice chair of our state's police training commission. And he had told me some really crazy stories about how often he got stopped as a teenage driver when he was driving from Skyway to Garfield High School back in the late 80s, and getting pulled over a lot.
What I was told at the time is I either fit a description, or your license plate light is out, or you looked at me a certain way, or you look nervous. I am nervous. Those are true lived experiences.
And he told me about encounters where he felt like he was the one de-escalating the situation as a teenager. And he says he has 3 brothers and they've all had the same experience. But as time passed, he said people would kind of not talk about these experiences or kind of downplay them.
Wow. I'm curious what he makes of this first step, Amy.
Yeah, he says, as a public servant, he just wants everyone to be really transparent about the impact of these changes so we will know and, continue to make adjustments. But he sounded really hopeful. He said for so long, Black families were having the talk, warning their kids about how to handle getting stopped by police. And finally, he says that lived experience is being more widely understood. It's making its way into policy and hopefully in time to benefit his own kids.
There's a reason why the talk existed. It wasn't because people just made it up in their minds in the African American community from fathers to sons. It was their experiences that they had before them. And then, unfortunately, that trend continued to my generation. And one of the reasons why, I have been involved is just that, so that my son's experiences, both of them, that they're not going to have the same experiences that I have. And that is what we have as a responsibility as the generation that has the opportunity to address issues at the table. So I'm glad we're dealing with it now. There's more work to do. How much time have we wasted? How many conversations could have been had? But we're having them now.
KUOW's Amy Radil, thank you so much. Always good to talk to you.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Jason Pagano produced today's show. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.
An ancient corner of northeastern Portugal has found itself stuck in a kind of ecological arrested development.
What we're missing here is a fully grown forest. That's what this landscape should be covered with. Mm-hmm. And it didn't have the chance because it's burning too often.
On the next episode of The Wild, I head to the KUOW Valley for a curious story of fires and a mission to bring back an entire forest ecosystem. Listen at kuow.org/thewild or wherever you get your podcasts.